She's Dewa. She's from actually.
Your light went out. I think the battery's dead up here.
The battery. Now lives in Yakima, Washington, and she teaches at the University College there on that reservation. And she's married to Dan people, and they are members of the Seattle Mennonite Church. And she also, the way we got involved in this is that she's been working with the United Nations for many years, helping develop their the indigenous, the Bill of Rights, or the International Bill of Rights for Indigenous people. And she's been involved in this for many years and has taken the writers, creators of that document have been working internationally with indigenous groups. And she shared this story, and this is what compelled me, really, when it was all said and done. She was working with a group of tribal people in Suriname, which is the north coast of Latin America. I forget which country, but it's one of those smaller countries there.
Yeah.
And what's going on in that part of the world right now? Extraction, a lot of mining, and a lot of displacement. So this is not something that happened just 500, 400 years ago. This is an ongoing thing that's happening in the world. And so, every time I pick up my iPhone, I have to remember the metals, the rare metals and stuff that are used in our phones and in our technology are coming from places around the world that are pretty much on the fringes and are places where a lot of people still live, and there's a lot of displacement. So she was working with this group in Suriname. She traveled up. Travel is by river, by canoe and stuff, and she went up and made contact with this particular group that was being threatened by a mining company. So the rights to mining were given to a mining company to come in and take out the minerals, mostly gold and that kind of thing. And what the mining companies do is they destroy the clean water. The drinking water gets poisoned with all kinds of stuff that goes into it. And so she met this woman who's now become a leader in this group, who had a child, and the child was born with some deformities and was ill, but they realized it was because of the poison that was in the water that they were using. And so in that culture, that indigenous culture, when a child dies, it's buried in the ground under the hammock where the mother sleeps, and so she stays near her. The grave is right under where she sleeps. And so this woman, and I don't have her name right off the top of my head, but she was part of a delegation that went into the capital to try to get some justice for this thing, because the mines had totally surrounded this village. And when she got back to her village, it had been fenced off. She couldn't get back. She couldn't get back to her village. She couldn't get back to the grave where her child was buried. And it was heartbreaking for her, and it kind of gives me goosebumps when I think about the pain that she must feel even now, that she can't be in her own culture. She can't live with that part of who she is. So this story really moved Sarah Augustine, and she got more and more engaged. And she said, well, maybe, there's a movement called Friends of Suriname or something like that is a part of an international movement. It's actually, the treasurer is a part of the Seattle Mennonite Church as well, but it's not part of a church movement. It's just a movement to kind of find resolution to some of the problems. But the problem of extraction is a big problem. And as we've seen, without being political, there's all kinds of issues around everywhere we live. New Mexico, Canada, North Dakota, South Dakota, South America, everywhere. We're in Asia and Africa. Our lifestyle is displacing and making it difficult for people who have lived there for centuries, for thousands of years, to continue to live there. So this, and the rights to go in and take this property is the right of eminent domain, the right of governments to do this, which is based historically on the Doctrin that you just heard read this morning. So I think our issue is it's multi-level. to back away from the speaker? Okay, I'll stay in the corner and kick me if I So anyway, that really pulled me into this idea of getting involved. So this coalition has organized, and it's Mennonite. There's a DVD. I'll leave it with you, so you can watch it if you want to. It's also available online. And there's information about how to watch it. It's based. It starts out in Busby, Wyoming, or Montana. It starts out in Montana, and one of the main speakers is Erica Littlewolf, who's part of our coalition. Erica is also now on the executive board of the Mennonite Church. She's going to be a board member coming up, and will represent that interest to the denomination as well. And Erica and Karen Wall from Central States, MCC Central States out of Newton, Kansas, have been doing a thing called Turtle Island and indigenous listening circles, and just kind of trying to help us understand what it feels like to be displaced, and to kind of figure out a way to go forward with that. So this coalition, which just met 2 weeks ago in Newton, and we drove up for that, gets together once a year. It's very loosely organized. There's not even a steering committee, right? Just the interest groups have a chairperson, and they get together and talk. So it's very indigenous. There's no plan at this point to become an organization. But people are beginning to get a sense of what's happening. Ted Swartz and Allison Brookings they're producing a play that's going to help interpret what this means, and it'll be available to be circulating. We don't know if there's going to be space for it at the convention in the summer of the Mennonite Church Convention, but it'll certainly be touring in the area. So anyway, in response to that meeting 2 years ago in California, Sherry Hosteller and I created this timeline, which kind of shows what happened through the centuries and so. We can leave it here if you're interested, but we also have a paper copy we can leave for you to take a look at it. Some of you will look at it. Basically, this is an attempt to kind of just give a historical outline as to how we got to where we are, and where. So the gray area is the indigenous experience, just little samples of certainly thousands of other experiences that aren't there, but this is just something we pulled out. And at the bottom is what was going on in what I call the macro, the governmental, the world, what was going on in the government and so forth. And in the middle is what happened in the Anabaptist Mennonite community through the years. And so, we trace our roots back to the Anabaptist movement. We experience our own displacement. And that kind of made it a little difficult for us sometimes to identify with other people who were displaced, because we're so wrapped up in our own martyr mythology, as I would call it. Maybe not a mythology, but a sense of larger importance, maybe, for us now than it should be sometimes. We settled in Pennsylvania. Our ancestors did, from Europe. And actually, early on, kind of began to question some of the things that were happening. Mennonites from the Germantown Mennonite Church joined with the Quakers, and the statement is generally ascribed to the Quakers, but it was really the Mennonites in that group that pushed the first abolitionist statement that was written in this country. So the first anti-slavery statement was written by Quakers who were really Mennonites, if that makes any difference. So we do have a history of being concerned and engaged in the issues of displacement and dispossession. Are there any descendants of Jacob Hosteller in this? Maybe not so much in this period. Jacob Hosteller is an Amishman who was an early Amish settler. And Irvin Stutzman has written some books about that story. the incident at North Kill, which is an early settlement of Amish who were attacked by a group of Lenape Indians, and it's called a massacre, which is really unfair. There was a skirmish and some people died there. Some of the Amish people died. And there are reasons why it might have happened. We don't know for sure. But that again is it's a very famous story among the Amish. They talk about it a lot. And kind of gives us a self-righteous, sense of, well, they killed us. Well, they killed a couple of people, and they took the Amish, the father, and a couple of sons up into the wilderness, and then they returned. But it kind of gave Mennonites this sense, well, we're not really part of taking anything away from anybody else. We just simply follow, other people. We follow the Presbyterians and the Methodists. They did the dirty work for us, and we came and farmed. So that kind of keeps repeating itself. And of course, in the 1870s, I mentioned this morning the material of death, which is, for me, that's my thing. In seminary, the people at the do every 2 years, they do the Potawatomi repeat this walk every 2 years. So they invited anybody to join them. And so the Mennonites have been joining them on this walk, and it's going to happen again in June from the Elkhart area down to Osawatomie, Kansas, just to kind of experience what. And they join in camp. It's a 1 week or 10-day trip that they experience what that was all about. It's a way of identifying, a way for I think for Mennonites from that particular area to understand what happened. In the 1870s, Leona's ancestors and folks from South Dakota, your ancestors came from Russia and settled in the Great Plains. One thing that we don't hear about the Russian settlers was that when they were invited into Russia by Catherine the Great, the land that they settled there was also full of people, and those folks were dispossessed as well. So we have it in our own story of settling in lands where other people have lived before us and not paying for it necessarily. We've paid sweat and labor and that kind of thing, and with money, but we've been part of this. We've been part of this story. We're not separate from it. So there's a picture of the immigrant house at Mountain Ridge, and then on down in the 1900s, the Cherokee Run in Oklahoma. We also were part of that. We moved right in the town of Menno or Meno, I'm not sure. Meno. Entirely Mennonite. Right in that area where the Cherokee were dispossessed of what was supposed to have become their land. And so it goes. In the 1900s, also the Indian schools was one way of trying to deculturalize, and there's a long history of that, including some of our own work. Right now, I don't know if you've been following what's been happening at the Hopi Mission School. It's the one school we have yet. And I think we've tried to be very fair about how we handle these situations, and yet we can't extract ourselves from the history of how these things came about. And then in this century, of course, MCC's been working in it, burying reburying, and I think anthropologists would go through and pick out human remains and that sort of thing, and they were on display in museums and so forth, in the Smithsonian and other places. I don't know if they've done that to Mennonites. I don't see any Mennonite skeletons hanging out any place, or Methodists or other people, but we did it to Native Americans. And it was sort of like, well, they're not really like us. They're not maybe quite worth as much as we are, and so we can take their remains and put them on display, like you might a mastodon or something like that. So MCC's been working at repatriating and reburying those remains as that becomes available. And your own leaders, Lawrence Hart and others, have been helping with that. And then I talked a little bit about the story that Sarah Augustine shared about current issues with extraction. And right now in Arizona, in the Tonto Wilderness, there's some trading going on. And I don't know if you've seen it on the news, or these things don't get picked up because there's other stuff that seems to be worth more newsworthy these days. Issues of dispossession don't get picked up by the media very often. And I think it's our duty to kind of be aware of those things and make people aware of it, and when possible, stand up for people who are having their property taken from them. So right now the Apache, I forget which tribe it is, I can't, at the far end, there's a sacred space that they go to for their ceremonies and that kind of thing. And whether or not you believe that that's right or wrong, it's their right to be who they are. I mean, we really can't take that right away from them. And that's being traded out to an Australian company that wants to mine copper there. So our need and our drive for things is kind of behind some of what's happening here. So that's the timeline. And I'd be happy to entertain any kind of questions because I'm sure I can answer everything. So. Any responses? I'd be interested in what you might have to ask. And let me share.
Well, coming from a family whose ancestors came to Kansas, I would never have known that there were people there that we took the land away from. So some of the land that I owned in Kansas was not historically in my family before my family got there.
Yeah, I think it's good to know. One movement I know that in the churches in Iowa, they're asking all the congregations to look at the land where the church stands and to do a forensic search of the history of how that property came into the possession of the congregation. It's one thing we can do. So I don't know this part of New Mexico very well. I don't know New Mexico at all very well. I'm starting to dig into it a little bit. So who was here? What were the different groups that moved here? And also understand indigenous history. If you go up to the what's the name of the place we went? The
Living Desert.
The Living Desert. There's some really nice exhibits there, and they talk about the history of the Apache here. They're Athabascan. They were cousins to the Navajo. When did they come? Well, they came 1,000 years ago. They weren't here for 10,000 years. They moved down from up north. So knowing that there was a dynamic movement of cultures and history in this area, just become aware of it and be knowledgeable. So.
Well, South Dakota, we have many reservations here also in New Mexico, and I'm not sure when that was done in 1800, 1700. But anyway, so looking back at that when we were putting reservations, is that good? Has it been bad? Was there another course that could have been taken, or would it have been better if we were assimilated?
And that's a question I think we will always have to be asking. I think one of the things that's helpful to do is to get to know people, if nothing else. Get to know people from the indigenous cultures. I have not done a good job of that in Albuquerque, and we have 10% of the city's Navajo. I could certainly be doing more than I'm doing. Up to 10% is in Native American. Considering my percentage is Navajo. We have the Indian Cultural Arts Center. They're talking about this. Many denominations are working on this issue. I don't know if there's anything on here that is.
I think it's hard not to get overwhelmed with, well,
What can
what
you
do
do?
I do now?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I think that's, for me.
And I think that's what we, like I said earlier, we're not going to go back to Germany.
Right.
We're here, and we're not being asked to go back. I think we're being asked to become aware of how we got here, and to be more sensitive.
Mhm.
Because, and maybe to open ourselves to the influence of the native cultures a little bit. I mean, they know a lot about this land, but we just kind of, we paid it over. They're much more sensitive to what the land is telling us, and maybe there's something we can learn from them as well. And I think that's, I'm going to go back to what Jesus was trying to do. I thought, anyway, what Jesus was trying to do when he's talking about the dispossessed. We have the cultural history too of occupying, and it's in the Bible, and we've used that repeatedly to maybe take advantage when maybe we should have been more sensitive. We can't go back. We can't go back here. We can't go back in history.
And it's much more easy to talk about what our grandfathers and great-grandfathers were involved in, and we can lament. It's much easier to talk about that than it is about North Dakota or Central America, or where corporations or governments are moving in and taking control.
Yeah.
But that's political. That's not very just.
Right. And I think that's where we have to work at.
It's often governed by the economics of the corporations. They do what's the least cost so that they can get the greatest profit. And, the market system has its advantages, but it also is a source of a lot of greed sometimes.
Right. And like I said, in my iPhone, so I look at it a lot. We all, those of us that have technology like that, I think we need to be aware of how we've got it. Somebody is paying a price for our convenience and our technology.
Do you think I should not do it?
Well, that's a good question.
Yes, Dickie.
You have a flip phone? That's all. And one of the criticisms of this kind of conversation is, well, there's nothing we can do about it. Why should we go there? And I think it's okay to open it up a little bit. I think it's okay to go there and think about it.
Well, I think the fact that we like everything as cheap as we can get it is turning somebody else.
That's really one of the issues, because we don't want to pay maybe what it's really costing somebody else. That would slow down our economy. Which, whether it's energy, whether it's technology, food. So a lot of our policies are related. What I want to get at actually is that this idea that we can dominate everything. The idea of owning land is a European idea. We can't take over this. And so we're called to be stewards more than we're called to be owners, I think, of what we've got. And even the possessions that we have, that we have mortgages for and title to and all that, somebody else really holds the title. And I think that is maybe what we need to be more conscious of. And maybe not to hold it so tightly, to hold it more loosely as we think about it. So my challenge to myself, I'm trying to figure out how to work through this retirement investments and all that kind of stuff. What does that mean? So many of us are not at that stage of life. I own it, and I have to say it. I'm very much a part of the system. And so I don't think it's about feeling guilty, although Erica Littlewolf, who's the one woman I mentioned earlier, she said guilt isn't all that bad sometimes. It does have its place. So,
I think also when you think of like the simulation of another culture or something, it's like, are we going to become like them, or are we expecting them to become like us?
or is there?
So, that's always kind of hard too. If we think that we've got the right way or we have a good way or something, we expect everyone to become like us rather than looking at the good things that the other culture has to offer.
And I think that's what Jesus was saying in the parable this morning. We tend to think that the Christian way that we've got, our particular Christian way isn't the way, And in many ways, yes. But Jesus said, well, but there are people that are not in your tradition, not in your particular way of understanding things that have value. They might have something to show you or teach you. And how do we retain the essence of who we are as followers of Jesus and still understand the value of somebody who maybe isn't in the same place, but has something to teach us, especially around the way we view the land and what it might be telling us. Native culture, they talk about Mother Earth a lot, and they tend to be sensitive in a way that our modern way of living doesn't allow us to be. Maybe our farmer grandparents who were out with the horses and stuff working the land had more of a sense of how nature was functioning. I'm speaking for myself.
We call them those wacky ranchers.
Well, we don't have any like that.
Well, and one thing, on what your wife was saying, I learned a few years ago that a melting pot is a fantastic thing because you learn to appreciate other people and include them and not view them as different. The problem with a melting pot is individual cultures begin dying.
Right.
So there's a give and take, and some cultures, yes, you might offer some beautiful things, but there's some things you wish you had nothing to do.
Right.
So it's a very fine line to walk to not have any kind of discrimination toward a group that you disagree with.
Right. It is.
The dominant culture is the teacher, everybody else is the learner.
That's kind of how we function, right? And here, the dominant culture, you get to control the story and what gets passed on.
But keep in mind, it's not arrogance, it's confidence.
Right.
And it seems that the American ideal is to bring everyone up to our standard of living. That's not sustainable on a limited earth. And then who's going to make our toys?
And that's what I was saying. There's a sensitivity to the limits of our environment that indigenous cultures they learned a long time ago not to not mess with it. Because if you read that book I mentioned, I'd recommend it, 1491, the pre-Columbian, the history of this hemisphere before Columbus. There's one called 1492, which I haven't read, which is the story since then. But I was amazed when I started reading there, and you go down into the Amazon regions, and they were controlling the flow of rivers and building mounds and creating actually changes in the climate to grow crops and make it work, because the desert, the jungle soils were not, you couldn't do. But in North America, I read that at certain times the smoke was so thick from burning the underbrush in the forests of New York and Pennsylvania and up in that area. They were controlling burns that the indigenous people were doing for years, thousands of years before we came. And they knew how to work with it. They knew that if they cleared out the underbrush, they could work better. So they controlled it. And we're not the only ones that have worked at controlling nature, but they seem to be able to go control it, in a with nature kind of sense, rather than overpowering it and trying to totally manage it and understand it. So I think there's a lot we can learn.
Did the government's role in instituting the Indian schools have anything to do with this? I don't know if you're familiar with it. I think they just closed one in Pennsylvania and Ohio like 15 years ago.
Yeah, Indian schools were part of a movement in the late 1800s and into the 1900s to, the Carlisle schools in the state of
Yeah, that's right.
Pennsylvania after the Civil War. they would take children away from their families and bring them into these schools and cut them off from their culture and try to make them fight, basically. And it was pretty devastating to a lot of people, psychologically and emotionally to a lot of these folks. And so that legacy is not a very good one, I don't think. Certainly, some of them were acculturated, and some of us, know people that might have been part of that. In Albuquerque, we've got Indian School Avenue. Road. Yeah. There was a large down by the native the Pueblo Cultural Center, a large site of an Indian school, and certainly all over the country. It's happening. Yes, the government. The church was also very much involved, and Mennonite Church actually operated one of those schools at Garlandton, Oklahoma, for a while. So we were also part of it. They looked to the churches to kind of help with this cultural, to help push the culture. So we've been part of it. Certainly, in New Mexico, the Presbyterians were very involved in the schools. In the West here, I don't know if you know the history of how the missionaries took I don't know what part of the West, but they gave certain areas to the Presbyterians and certain areas to the Lutherans and other Protestant groups, and that's how we got Hopi Mission School, because that was a little piece that was given to the Mennonites to work in the Hopi area, and that's why the Presbyterians are so prominent in New Mexico. They were given this territory to missionize and to Christianize. So we don't talk about those things and don't really realize it. So it's a part of our history.
And these were all good intentions.
All good intentions. But it's what are we doing now? Now that we know this, we'll become aware, learn about it, and I don't know. There's a movement to. I want to point out one thing in terms of the law. I mean, the legal system is a piece of it that the government listens to churches more than any other. If you think something's wrong, go as a denomination, go as a church group, go speak to the powers, because they will listen to the churches in ways that they won't listen to other nonprofits or other groups. There's a moral imperative from the churches, and I think we should not ignore that. We've got that. We have that power. So there's a movement. It may never be achieved, but there's a movement to renounce the doctrine of discovery, and there's kind of an interesting dialogue with the Catholic Church these days, within the Catholic Church and between groups like ours and the Catholics. And they say, well, that happened in history. We're no longer pushing that idea. But last year when the Pope came or 2 years ago, when the Pope came to speak to the Congress, I guess it was just last 16. I forget. Maybe 15. There was, at the same time, there was this promotion of Father Sarah, the guy that set up all the missions in California to elevate him to sainthood. And there was a big pushback on the part of the Native American groups here, because they felt like he was really part of the problem. He culturalized them. And so to raise him to sainthood, and the Pope recognized that he made some kind of a statement about it, was kind of an affront to the Native Americans. Just being aware that conversation continues, so that. But talking to the church is important. So there's this push, and there's this call to action, which I think is a little bit maybe unattainable for us at this point, but it's a call for the church as an organization to call attention to this, and actually calling for the Pope himself. Little group of Mennonites asking the Pope to do something, but we're not the only ones. There's a large movement of people within the Catholic Church. I think the Episcopal Church, the main line denominations have already taken up statements renouncing and the doctrine of discovery. The Catholic movement, it's a large, very difficult organization to kind of influence really with. And who are we? Well, we did that. Of course, we did that. Our own little thing 500 years ago. Whatever. And yet there's this dialogue that needs to continue with the powers. And so there's a movement to ask the Pope to renounce this doctrine officially. And Catholic scholars will say, well, we've renounced it. We're not doing that anymore. But it's in history. And it's still referred to. It was used in a suit that the Oneida Indians took up about 15 years ago in New York. There was some kind of a lawsuit about land ownership and the right to have their own sovereignty. Native Americans don't own their land; it's owned by the U.S. government. Yeah, so that's still an ongoing issue. So there was a lawsuit. This doctrine was cited in the countersuit and it was overturned and stuff. So this doctrine of discovery is written into our legal system still. So we're still living in this story. It's not done, and we don't know where it will end up. But there's a movement within the churches to say, look, how can we be part of a system that morally dispossesses people and takes their rights away from them? And so there's all the issues around sovereignty of the tribes and all that kind of thing. It's very mushy and fuzzy, and we don't know where that will go. But it's something I think we all need to be aware of. So what happened right here? Is this going to
Go ahead.
Right here, this case right here. It's a little complicated. The doctrine of Johnson versus McIntosh was this case back in actually southern Indiana, I think, where trying to decide who owned the land. This developer bought the land. He thought he bought the land from the native tribes there and paid them for it. And then he found out that he couldn't buy it from the native tribes. He had to buy it from the government. And so this became a case in the Supreme Court. And Justice Marshall ruled that the government ultimately owned the land, and the tribes were not able to buy and sell their own land. So that is the precedent that's written into our legal system that allows government to dispossess anybody that they feel like they can. So it's not just Native Americans. It might be a farmer in Iowa, or it might be that when they want to put a road through or a pipeline or whatever, South Dakota. You cannot resist the government because it's written in our law. That's where it comes from. That's just one of the issues, is trying to be aware of how we are who we are. Maybe we can't do anything about it, but knowing where things originate is important.
So clarify again, this, I guess, kind of that the reservation, this land being sold, and that goes through the government, not through the reservation, whoever it be.
Ultimately, like what's happening now in Arizona right now.
Because they have their own domain or authority, whether it be different things, but it's still under the U.S. government.
Congress just signed off on the sale. There's still a big fight about it. Yeah.
Indians, Native Americans cannot vote. Is that correct?
No,
That just happened
in the last
10 years.
Well, no, they've been able to vote since the early 1900s, I think. But they weren't considered fully human, and way back, they were considered less than. So yeah, the thing that's going on right now in the Tonto wilderness is a case in point. They're fighting in the courts and trying to keep this mining company from coming in, but the senator from Arizona, John McCain. I like him. Actually, I think he's a pretty good guy. He kind of moved some things around, and And somehow this is happening. It was added onto a bill or whatever. And so we need to, there are times when we need to go to the government and say, look, let's be fair here. We can do without the copper. We can figure another way forward. We can do without some of the things that we expect we're going to have. And part of it's sustainability. We know that could be an issue. And I'm speaking out of my head, so feel free to challenge me on any of this stuff. I'm saying what I think, and it's not.
So who would profit from the sale of that land? Who would actually get the money from the sale of that land?
That's something I really don't know. I'd have to go back and go online and figure out. But it's a place where they go on for their sacred, for their vision quest kind of cleansing ceremonies and that kind of thing. Yeah, so it's an important part of their culture. So,
but needless to say, the government would be the ones to profit from it, both in the sale and then in future tax revenues from the mining. So they would profit doubly on it.
Yeah. So in the West, that's maybe a bigger issue. In the East, people don't think about it so much. But in the West, where there's still a lot of extraction going on, that's very much a part of where we overflow that.
Well, not only a lot of extraction, but a lot of federally controlled land as well.
Right.
But on the other hand, in Mexico, the whole thing of ejidos, which is communally owned land, they were not able to sell it, and America is pressuring them to, deed this to people so they can sell it. Well, then what do you do if a bunch of people now I don't need this land, I'm going to sell it, and then they have nothing. And that's the other side of that.
Yeah. And that has happened also here in some of the reservations where they've done this, what we call a checkerboard. What's happening here in New Mexico right now, and Todd Winward was here earlier, right, with New Mexico Interfaith Power Night. There was a meeting at our church about a month ago about then I'll bring up fracking in oil country. But what's happening up in the checkerboard area, Apache and Hickory and Navajo areas around between Albuquerque and Farmington, it's privately owned. Every other square mile is privately owned, and the reservation. So they don't have any control about what's going on around. So all of a sudden, there's a lot of oil extraction happening, and you're out in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden there's big lights around you, and pumps going, and all kinds of noise, and the roads are being beat up, and there's all kinds of people from Texas around, and you don't know who they are. And so the culture you had, there's noise going all night long. You can't sleep, you can't, you get pushed off the road by the trucks. And so, where did that come from? So that's going on today, this whole issue of extraction. So, we know we're part of that, whether we're fracking or whatever that means, we're all part of that. We're all living in that system. And I think just having our eyes wide open about it and knowing what kind of impact it has on people is important. That it's costing somebody something, even if we're not paying as much to the gas pump.
One of the sad messages that came out of this that I'm becoming more and more aware of living in New Mexico, the statistics that were being fed through the media and other places of maternal health care, children's education on the reservation, even the, infant death rate. I mean, all the things we take for granted, the resources are not being allocated there because, I don't know, is it part of this whole idea that that stuff is needed more than ever, with the poor schools, with the lack of health care, and I ask myself, what should we be doing about that? Because I think it's part of this whole
there's a lot of
that has come down to them.
Well, we have a friend from our church who's a CPA, and he works with some of the reservations, and he's not very complimentary of financial practices on the reservations. He says, it's there's a lot of behind the scenes and a lot of corruption. Does that mean
their fault, not ours.
Yeah, it's their fault, not ours. What does that mean?
That's the relief.
What does that mean? And so I don't want to romanticize anything. I think there's a reality. Children, we're at the bottom, and New Mexico's at the bottom on most of those lists in terms of poverty and for children and nutritional issues and that kind of thing. Kind of related to this. It's kind of interconnected. I've often thought that MCC Central States ought to actually be working in New Mexico too, because we have issues. We can use some.
Our natives from South Dakota have those same insurance.
Totally. Yeah.
They also have big alcoholism. Is it that way here?
Yeah.
Is that just South Dakota?
Sure. It's an issue. Part of it, and correct me, part of it is actually a different kind of metabolistic process.
Well, I know a lot of it's genetic. I think a lot of it's cultural because they don't have employment.
Right. We're going to actually have our next coalition meeting at Pine Ridge. So that'll be an eye opener for me.
There you will see poverty like you have.
Yeah. So I don't have an answer. I'm just sharing how we got to where we. What I understand is how we got to where we are. I think we have to work together, all of us, from every different direction. Left, right, inside, outside, up and down. We've got to find a way of figuring out a future for our children and grandchildren. That gives everybody a right.
Well, it's probably the children of Israel's fault. Because those were the first peoples, right? They went on into
They went into yeah.
Well, that's part of the legacy that I live with is what happened to the Canaanites? In the Bible, it was kind of they just became non-people. And is that really the true story? The Bible's we've got lots of contradictions in it too. And I think that one of the things is that idea of conquest, rightful conquest, is problematic for me. And what do we do with that? Because we kind of keep religion in our world.
And what benefit is it for our Native people to become more politically active? Would their voice be heard, and would changes be made for their benefit?
I think it depends on those of us who have power, whether we want to listen or not, frankly.
Power is power. It would be a hard time for them to get a position to raise to a point where people would understand what the real issue is.
It's certainly we're more aware of it in New Mexico and Arizona and in the West, where there's much more visibility for the population. Indiana, nobody thinks about this kind of stuff at all.
Right. I would imagine that nowadays, with the whole climate issues and ecology and everything, I kind of tend to think that the Native Americans have a lot to offer to us as to how we might need to live, whether we think we do or not. So I'm just thinking their voice might be heard in a little different way.
Yeah, just because we can extract it doesn't mean can I live without my iPhone? I probably can't. Can I live without lots of things? And I think finding a level of sustainability is probably the biggest lesson that we can learn from folks. But now that we've visited upon populations like that, issues of alcoholism and poverty, there's no clear answer, easy answer. People have to also be involved in solving their own problems. We certainly want to, I think it's incumbent on us to remove roadblocks as much as possible and raise the opportunity level for everybody. And maybe that means lowering our own level of consumption a little bit.
Well, thank you. This has been very helpful. Also, in your role as a moderator, would you like to update us on anything that's happening in the conference in the next 5 minutes?
Sure. Well, thank you for the time. I don't know where to start. How did I get to this? How did I get to do what I'm doing? Well, they scraped the bottom of the we're in the middle of, as a conference. I took this on at a point where I feel pretty connected to the conference in many ways. And most of you know Herman Weaver, of course, resigned about a year and a half ago. And in the interim, we've hired transitional pastors and acting transitional ministers, conference minister, and acting Linford and Marietta. They've been here, right?
And Annie,
and Annie was here. Linford and Marietta have been doing an awesome job. They've been getting out, listening, and helping us think through where we want to go. And we know we've got issues to look at in terms of coming together. There are also some structural issues that I'm working on related to the way the board is organized and to the fact that we can't afford, obviously, a full-time conference minister going forward. So there are challenges, and there's some real energy out there as well. So what I would say is, in terms of organizational shift, there's a proposal, and I'll send it to you, and you can share it here. We're in the feedback, just starting the feedback process of a proposal to restructure the leadership board to not be this group of people that are up here, get together once in a while and say, yeah, that's a good job, keep going, to actually be a working board, and so that members of the board will be engaged in some of the key events going on in the conference. So we have the SEED project, which is basically that's our mission enterprise. We've got ministerial council. I want a nurture commission. I want a formation, nurture, and prayer focus commission. Hopefully that'll come about. We've got a fundraising and development commission. So all these people, instead of functioning out there and then having a board that doesn't know what's coming, that will be represented on the board, so that when we gather together as a board, kind of like a church board, we know what we're talking about, and we're interacting and relating to each other. That proposal is just going out. Then the proposal for the conference minister, because of resources, we're going to be living within our means in the future instead of borrowing from our reserves, means that we probably can't afford a full-time conference minister. So how do we handle pastoral agenda for congregations? We're going to borrow a little bit from other conferences and ideas, and we're going to have regional. The proposal is to have regional pastors, a north and a south pastor that would kind of work directly with the congregations. We have 21 congregations at this point, and so the regional pastors will be in touch with the local pastors and kind of support them in that system. And the conference minister will work with local churches as needed, but will be more of a resource person for the regional pastors. And then the other part of the conference minister's job, which will be half-time, is to really kind of help us move forward in terms of mission and planting churches and that kind of thing. Really paying attention to who we are what is our mission as a conference, and not just being a chaplain. We really be engaged in moving conference forward. So that proposal is going to be floating as well. So we'll be interested in feedback on that. So there's a job description for the conference minister, for the regional pastors, and a description of the leadership board that is just a week ago was just kind of been approved to start circulating.
Can you talk about where assembly will be this summer?
Assembly next summer is going to be at a Ponderosa Retreat Center. It is in the Front Range of Colorado. It's right off of I-25. It's a Baptist campground. It's beautiful, and it's only 4 miles east of I-25, between just north of Mennonite, Colorado, up on that hill there. And I was out there with Linford and Marietta a couple of weeks ago, and signed my name. That's what the moderator does. You sign it. And I think it's going to be it's going to be able to accommodate all different kinds of functions like we like to have. And it's a low enough altitude that, Rocky Mountain Camp was too high, frankly, for some people last year. And it's accessible to the Front Range. Find your way up there if you can make it. I know it's a long ride.
What's the dates on that?
The first weekend in August.
So we should bring a couple carloads up there then.
With Friday night, we're going to have John McCutcheon, who's a folk musician, as our focus. He's a Quaker, a man of God, and he does these folk concerts, popular folk as well as gospel and religious stuff. He'll be doing a concert Friday night, and we're just getting going on planning the sessions. The other thing that's going on is the end of April is our Faith and Life Forum, and that'll be at Bethel as well. And that'll be Drew Hart, who wrote a book called The Trouble I've Seen, talks about, and it's more of this kind of issue. He's African American, teaches at Messiah College, and he's going to be sharing his perspective on racism and the issue. Heard a lot about black lives and all that. What that means. It's the parallel issue that we've been talking about. That's on the 29th of April. If that falls into anybody's interest. So it's kind of
another carload of Paris. Half day thing.
I'd encourage you to get the book. Order the book from Harold. The book he's written is called The Trouble I've Seen, published by Harold Press. Read the book and then come up and join the conversation. We're in the transition. Hopefully by summer, assembly will have a name to present for the conference minister. So we'll be in that process. The Zing, the online publication, you all
Did everybody get that? Zing? If you don't, let me know and I'll put your name on the list.
Yeah, you can get it.
But it's a conference publication that they can have link there.
We don't print it. Maybe we should lay out printed copies.
Anything else from the conference people have questions about? Or you can talk to...
talk to me if you want to.
Yeah.
We certainly have our challenges. You know that. And I like Leonard Cohen as a poet. He wrote probably the other songs. Very popular. He has a line in one of his songs called Anakinna. I can only repeat the concept of the actual words. I'm really bad at memorizing poetry. He talks about life being full of cracks. He put the cracks and the lies left the light in. And I think as long as we own our brokenness and let the light in, I think that's our nature. Let's not back away from the challenges and the cracks in the midst, but let's let the light in through those cracks.
Well, we certainly want to thank you for coming down this weekend and sharing with us. Thanks, and may God continue to use you and conference moderator role to lead us on.
Well, thank you. And like I said, any feedback on this whole deal, I have another invitation working with another church, so if I can improve it, I'd be happy to do that.
So, if you